Hi, my name is Adrian Rădoi, and I'm the founder of Extreme Integration, an online education platform where we teach high achievers the formula for purposeful living. Today, I'll talk about how you can make change a constant in your life and how you can embrace it as your best friend. If you are in your 30s or in your 20s or even your 40s, I think you cannot not care about changing yourself, right? We are evolving so fast these days that change is almost like a constant. We are, however, a bit scared about the concept in itself, about the implications of having to change, about the discomfort, the pain of going through, all sorts of problems that we cannot even start worrying about, to the fullest extent. So I would like to share a bit from my own experience on dealing with change, how I grappled with it, and I will share with you a bit the framework that I developed for myself based on a lot of things that I learned from all my mentors throughout these last 5 years, and how I deconstruct change for myself to make it practical and actually help me to overcome any kind of challenges that I face in the everyday, life. So I would like to first start by making like a distinction between two different types of change. I wrote here identity first change versus behavior first change, right? Ultimately, it's all about behavior. For change to be persisted, we need in the end to change behavior in a way that will override the current way of doing things. Change is persisted habits, right? It's part of behavior. It becomes automatic ultimately. That's the whole idea of change, right? And I'm talking about this kind of change. I'm not talking about, changing, I don't know, your tire, right? At your car. I'm talking about like deep transformational change that we can impact in our own lives, right? So how I how I thought about this for myself is that you can approach this in two different ways, depending on the situation, right? And I think I embodied both concepts in my life. But the first type of change that I was confronted with was this one, behavior first change. How exactly? So, back in 2019, when my personal transformation journey started, let's say, um, it all started when I was faced, with a very big personal crisis. And I had to accommodate those circumstances in one way or another. I had to make sense of what was happening, but it was very difficult, right? It was the year when I heard or when I found out that my mother was diagnosed with cancer. And everything started to crumble around me. Like the very stability that I took for granted for, the best part of 30 years that I had at the time, everything shifted like instantly in front of me, and I was not recognizing anything anymore from the life that I knew to be safe and comfortable, so I was forced, if you want, into change by this very crisis. And when I say behavior first change, is that because I was not able to find any kind of consolation in the outside world, my personal transformation journey started with having to go within, right? I was basically trying to find a refuge in myself for giving or for grasping in the end for some sort of psychological safety, for some sort of a safety net to give me any kind of comfort. And of course, at the beginning, I didn't found any because I didn't have at the time a very good relationship with myself. I was not my best friend, let's put it that way. I was very harsh with the world, with everyone, but ultimately, that harshness was simply a projection of my relationship, my own relationship with myself. So when I was forced by external circumstances to go within, that place was not a much better alternative either, you know. But at the same time, I didn't have any other place to go. So this kind of personal crisis, this kind of deep crisis in life, they force you somehow on this growth journey, right? It's like an evolutionary pressure that you just cannot ignore. And we know very well that all the species evolved because of the evolutionary pressure. At the same time, evolutionary pressure is not something that you can take lightly, and it's not enjoyable. And no species evolved throughout the history just because they were getting bored, you know, or they didn't want to just live the life like before and they just wanted to evolve a bit into a different species. No, it was always this kind of environmental pressure, starting, of course, in the life of a certain individual, but then propagated over generations. And then even the physiology itself transformed. That's why we have such a huge diversity of species, right? Because evolution forced us to evolve in all sorts of ways. In our case, in the case of a human being, luckily, we can have this kind of virtual personal evolution, if you want, without having to abide by the, you know, evolutionary timescales. And when I say that I feel like I evolved, is because I look back at how I was seeing myself in 2019, how I perceived myself as an identity, as a self back in 2019, and 5 years later, I don't recognize myself anymore, right? What you see today is a completely different human being. And just to give you an example, I mean, first of all, the obvious example is that I would not have had the courage to make this video in the first place. That's one thing. I was overweight, approaching 97, 100 kilograms. Now I'm 80, right? Stable at 80 for 2-3 years. I was very insecure. I was feeling weak. I was very sedentary. I was consumed by, you know, my hunger sensations, for example. You know, I was always very hungry if I was not able to eat, whenever I felt the sensation of hunger. And I transformed on all these levels in such a dramatic way that I myself don't recognize the person who I was 5 years ago, right? I mean, I recognize that person from like I recognize any other person that I meet, but I don't identify with that person anymore. And that's the key in the end, which means that I changed so much that I feel I adopted an identity of a different person. Put it differently, if I would have seen someone like me 5 years ago and just looked at that person in a just normal everyday life and how it behaves, how he behaves, what does he do in terms of day-to-day activities, does he have a morning routine or not, does he have some sort of, you know, physical activity in his life, what does he eat, how he is living basically everyday life, how he is interacting with people, I would not have recognized myself in that, right? And of course, because I can see this parallel, I cannot help but try to teach what I learned to other people who might face that kind of imprisoned, you know, living state that I felt in back then. And yeah, I just want to share with you basically how I was able to transform like that in the end, right? So behavior first change, it's what I experienced first when my external conditions were too difficult to accommodate anymore. So it was the kind of environment pushing me to change, right? And it all amplified. Like a few months after we learned about the diagnosis, when, you know, my wife got pregnant and I knew I will have a child, right? And thinking of this strange situation in which I knew at that point, or rather something struck me, and I knew that I have to make some important changes in my life, because otherwise, most probably, if I don't improve my life and I don't care about my body that well, I might end up in a similar situation like my mother and make my son suffer the way I'm suffering now. And my mother was the kindest human being you can imagine. And she felt immortal, right? She was only 58 when she passed away, so we diagnosed her when she was like 53 or 54. And she committed her life, she dedicated her life, she sacrificed her life even for others. So she was always in service of other people, trying to do everything for others, but neglected her own existence, herself, right? And I knew that in order for me, I knew at that point when I learned that I will have a son, I knew that I cannot help him if I don't help myself first. I cannot stay with him when he will be, old and when he will have his own children if I don't take care about me, right? So it was like this incredible opportunity for me to have like a deep self-reflection of what I actually have to do now, because I cannot simply stay like I used. I cannot just go on cruise control and stay comfortable and, like not do anything about it, right? So at one point, I simply decided that all of a seemingly out of the blue, that I will start to improve my fitness, right? And because I didn't know any better, I said, okay, it was in September 2020, shortly after my son was born, right? Because after I had this initial realization and I wanted to actually do something about it, still took a lot of time. I still had to have some sort of of pressure to build up until there was a critical threshold that forced me into behaving, forced me into doing something about it. I was not at all okay with how I was feeling about myself, and I need to break the shell of that identity, of that self, who I knew won't be able to be the kind of stability for my family that I needed at some point in that period, and I knew that, and I had to force this. So what I did at that point in September was like, I will start running, because I heard that, if you run, it's better for you, right? I didn't know anything about running or staying fit or fitness or exercise or nutrition, anything, right? So I decided that I will run 5 kilometers a day for 6 days a week for the next 3 months. And I knew that this decision, it's not negotiable. I arrived to a point where this critical threshold was clearly passed. And for me, the pain of staying the same clearly became greater than the pain I knew I will suffer by keeping my commitment of having to run indeed these 5 kilometers every day, 6 days a week for, the next 3 months. And mind you, the most I ever ran before was, I think, 2 or 3 kilometers, but not even in one shot, right? So I knew it will be very, very difficult. And it was. And at the beginning, at least in the first couple of weeks, I didn't know if something will break, because I was barely able to run at all after 1 kilometer, and I knew I have still 4 more to go. But at the same time, the only thing that I cared about to really know deeply was that I will not die, right? And I knew that the suffering that I would incur for not being able to keep my promise and go back to my old behavioral patterns and my old way of being was much greater than the pain and suffering that I was experiencing while I was running. So it was like this trade-off that I was making in real time of accepting the suffering, knowing that the psychological suffering of going back to how I was feeling myself before was not something that I accepted, was not a trade that I was willing to accept, right? But this is key because after 3 months, yes, I made it, but my knees were jacked. So my knees were completely blown blown up. I had slight injuries, so it was not at all pleasant, and it's not something that I recommend to anyone. But I knew that if I would achieve this, even if it sounded crazy and unreasonable by all accounts, I had to do it to prove myself that I can do extremely difficult things, or at least what I perceived at the time to be extremely difficult things, right? Because you can imagine for other people this would be like a walk in the park, but for me it was something incredibly difficult. So this is behavior first change. And now let's go a bit and look at this small block diagram here. This is identity, right? And I made it a sad identity because typically this is how most our identities are, at least before we take some action and change that, right? We are sad most of the time, or at least I was sad most of the time, and I didn't know why. Then this identity feeds the beliefs that we have about ourselves, right? Let's take the example of me running. The identity that I had was that I am not a runner, right? And truth be told, I had all the reasons possible to believe that. And that was, by the way, true, right? So how did I build that identity that I'm not a runner? By having the beliefs that I cannot run, right? I cannot run. I believe I cannot run. And how was this belief so true to me up to the point when I started to run? Because genuinely I believed I will not be able to run 5 kilometers until I decided I will do it, right? Because I knew it's not impossible and I knew I will not die. So I just decided to do it. So this belief of thinking I cannot run was simply persisted and fed back by the results that I was consciously or unconsciously accumulating along the years, right? So R here is from results. What do we have in between? We have T/A, which is thoughts/emotions, right? The beliefs that we have generate certain thoughts and emotions. These thoughts and emotions generate certain actions, right? We take a decision based on the thoughts and emotions that we have, and then we take an action or an inaction in my case, right? I was not running. Because I was not running, I was experiencing for myself the result of not having run, which just fed back to me the belief that I cannot run, right? And enough results of not having run then further fed into this second B here, which is behavior, right? I was just not running on a day-to-day basis. It was not part of my daily life, right? And this behavior, because it was like the proof that I was accumulating for the past 30 years, inevitably led me into having the behavior of not running in general. And this behavior just fed back to my identity of not being a runner. And if you followed up to this point, you can already take like a very powerful decision and a very powerful conclusion out of this. This belief, though it looked like true and it felt like true, like being true to me, like I cannot run, I am not a runner, it was not absolute truth, right? And the difference between my own subjective truth and the absolute truth was the potential of transformation, right? The gap between what I thought it's possible and what was really possible when I tested it, that was for me the opportunity to evolve and to transform. And we will investigate a bit more how exactly we can tap into that very gap of conscious awareness once we prove to ourselves that we are capable of doing things that we originally think we cannot do, right? This is just to show you how it works, right? And everything about how we perceive ourselves to be, everything related to the beliefs that we hold to be true, they are all created by ourselves through the accumulation of proof which enforce them. And this is the case for positive beliefs, like I can do stuff, and for negative beliefs, I cannot do certain things, right? And these results are very important, right? This is the key. This is the key with which we can now start building beliefs that actually serve us and that are conducive to a real positive transformation in our life. Okay? And we will see exactly how we can do it. Now, if you want, let's say, to actually start to run, you are not hit by a crisis like I was, right? And by the way, let's go back to just close the loop to my situation. Because I was able, I forced myself, I forced my behavior, I forced myself to go run. The fact that I was able to run for 3 months, 6 times a week, for 5 kilometers a day, was enough proof for me to implicitly change the beliefs that I had related to the fact that I was able to run, right? The beliefs that I had have to go at the level of I can run at least 5 kilometers. Because why? Because I did it so many times already. And I knew that. I was not able to fool myself into believing that actually I didn't do it, because I did it. And I did it a lot of times. I did it enough times that my identity was now, I am capable to run 5 kilometers. I'm some sort of a runner. I didn't feel like I'm a real runner because I didn't, run 10K or 20K or a marathon, but I knew I can do it, right? I knew I can. If I ran 5 kilometers, I can run 6, I can run 10, and maybe I can run even more. So I had this kind of inner feeling of more potential opening up in me by the very nature of the progress that I was seeing by staying committed to doing hard things, right? And this is where I started, when I started to develop my love for hardship, for embracing hardship, because I saw the results, right? I experienced the positive results for doing hard things by myself through my own motivation, right? I was forced in a way to do it, right? It was not like I just did it because I was, getting bored. Again, evolutionary pressure is not something that you can choose to do. I had to do it. I had to break the shell of that old me, insecure and weak as I perceived myself. And I had to just do something that would allow me to find more strength within myself, strength that I knew I would need in the upcoming years, from 2020 and onwards. So let's imagine now that you simply want to improve your health without waiting for a big personal crisis in your life. This behavior first change is not something that you can easily do. Why is that? Well, simply because if you look here, what feeds behavior is everything upstream of it, up to the identity, right? If you start now, and by the way, this is why most New Year resolutions fail after 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 1 month, in January or in February, because most people think that, okay, now I will just go to the gym, right? And they take the decision to change the behavior. From not doing any kind of physical activity before, they decide all of a sudden to go to the gym. And that decision in that moment gives them enough of a reward to feel that they did something, right? When they decide on 31st of December that they will actually, go and do stuff, there is some sort of a reward that they give to themselves to accommodate for the deep pain that they feel by not doing anything up to that point, right? And they then they put this kind of high milestones and high aspirations out of themselves, because they delegate the kind of like responsibility for repairing everything to their future selves. But of course, when they start doing things, the original motivation for wanting to change the behavior is not profound enough, is not big enough. It's not the kind of fuel that can entertain for a long enough time these new decisions that they took. And then they inevitably go into self-sabotaging behavior, which means that their identity of not being, athletes, or not going to the gym, or not lifting weights, will start to convince them to give up, right? All these beliefs, they have to first match the new reality, but you have to endure a lot, right? Because the mind wants always to preserve stability and comfort and minimize energy expenditure. So we always have this kind of drive of not doing things which are unnecessary. And by simply wishing in the last day of December that the next month you will do something incredible that you never did in the past, if you don't have a good reason behind that statement, you will just give up, right? Because when you will suffer, your mind will tell you, look, you're not the kind of person who is doing this, right? You never came to the to the gym up to today. Why do you think this will happen all of a sudden? So you have all these thoughts and emotions that are so compelling, that have such huge inertia and momentum, that you will always be forced to take an action which will give you the kind of result which contradicts the behavior that you want to establish. So that those beliefs that you have about yourself, which are old beliefs, right, belonging to an old identity, they are transformed into compelling narratives and reasons that you will articulate in your own mind. And your thoughts and the emotions that you will feel will force you to take a non-action, if you want, and you will just quit, right? And because you will quit, you will see that you quit as a result, right? And what will happen when you quit after 1 week of starting to go to the gym? You will feed back the beliefs that will convince you next year that indeed you cannot do it. Because now you accumulated proof that you cannot do it. That's why it's so critical to stay on track and execute your decisions when you take them, right? Because you cannot lie to yourself. You can fool yourself into believing stuff, but you always know the truth, right? You can fool yourself into believing things all day long. That's why these thoughts become so compelling that they can override all the good intentions that you had on 31st December, and they become so compelling that they force you to renounce the effort, even if on the 31st you had good thoughts and good intentions, and you were convinced, but not really, right, that you will actually adopt the behavior of going to the gym and becoming an athlete or whatever, right? Because let's face it, when you create those resolutions, you know that there is a high chance that you will not make it. because most probably it's not the first resolutions that you know just are not able to complete. But again, we need to give ourselves some sort of a relief. We need to start the new year on an uplifting note. We want to feel good about ourselves, so we give ourselves this kind of aspirations and visions because they feel good in the moment, right? And allow us to just go on with our lives. But when we actually have to do that, if you don't have a strong why you are going to the gym, that's something that you cannot sustain easily, right? So always it's important to know why you want to do something. That's why goal setting is incredibly important, but not any kind of goal. The goals that you set, they have to have some purpose behind it if you want to really change dramatically your life, right? In my case, because I was first into behavior, the advantage for me here was that I implicitly changed my identity without planning for it. I was now seeing myself as someone who is capable of doing much more than I thought was possible. And that very thing led me to think that also, on top of the newfound energy that I had for myself because I was losing weight, I was getting into a better shape, I found new ways of motivating myself. Especially after the passing of my mother, I didn't go back into the old patterns, right? Into the old habits. I didn't become again comfortable like I was 5 years ago, because during those 5 years, I changed myself that much that reverting to the initial identity was impossible, right? And this kind of consistent, persistent change day by day by day through implementation of good behaviors, either directly, but again, this has to be a crisis, or working on your identity is so important, right? Okay, so let's take a concrete case. I personally didn't want, okay, initially I wanted to run just because I didn't like how I was feeling about myself. I wanted to feel a bit better. I wanted to feel stronger, right? But then I said, okay, the game ultimately, it's not to ruin myself. It's not to break my legs. The goal and what I aspire to achieve here is to be healthy and to stay healthy for my children and for my wife and for my family and for everyone else, right? To stay healthy as a moral obligation to be able to serve the people I cared about most to the best of my abilities. So from running this, crazy, from setting this kind of crazy goals of running, each day 3 months, I was like, what kind of goal I can set now that will give me the kind of daily habits, the kind of behavior which is conducive with me living a healthy life, becoming healthy and staying healthy, right? And then I simply started to build a routine which allowed me to run, you know, it was like a more thoughtful decision. And it became part of my routine. I was already running at that point, so it was not easy after 3 months to not run because I saw so many good benefits, and there were 3 months in which I ran 6 times a week. So by the time of those 3 months ended, I actually embedded the behavior of running, right? So the next thing for me was to find something meaningful that I put running in service of. Why am I running? I'm not trying to run anymore to break out of my old identity and my old shell. It was not anymore a behavior first change. It was more of a purposeful goal, an aspirational goal, something that I wanted to do just to see if I can do it, and just because I liked the feeling of being able to achieve things that I set my mind to, right? This is a very important thing. So I wrote here also the name of a tool that I thought about, which is called remove the knots, N-O-T-S, to untie the knots, K-N-O-T-S. And the knots here are reflective to the self-limiting beliefs that we have, right? In my case, the first original belief was I cannot run 3 kilometers. I overcame that belief, I overwrote it with I can run 5 kilometers. And I did that enough time that it was undeniable proof that I can actually do it, right? So what does it mean untie the knots? Well, the knots are the limitations that are self-imposed. In my case, the knot was not giving myself the chance to actually start running or seeing if I can actually run more than 3 kilometers. It was a limitation that I took for granted. It was a self-imposed limitation that seemed like objective truth, right? Like subjectively for me was like the truth. I cannot run 3 kilometers, but the knot was what kept me from seeing the benefits from being able to run that distance. Does it make sense? I hope it does. So let's talk about identity first. Because now for me, the game that I play is not I want to avoid the crisis. I don't have this kind of run away from motivation that I started with, because that's typically a negative energy, and it's the kind of fuel that burns very fast, and it's not maintainable, right? I would not have been able to run endlessly 5 kilometers because anyway my knees were suffering a lot, so I had to come up with a better approach, a better plan. So my plan was, okay, how can I make this goal, right? And then I said I want to run 10K. And then I planned it, right? It was not just a rush decision. It was not something imminent that I had to avoid. It was something that I planned. So I want to run 10K. What do I need? Well, I knew at the time that I was able to run 5K. And I said, okay, what do I need to believe to be true for me to be able to run 10K? Well, I cannot fool myself that I'm able to run 10K, right? So my thoughts were, you cannot run 10K. You never ran 10K, it's not possible. And in order for me to actually enable this feedback loop in a positive way and actually get results that create this belief that I can run 10K, I had to use increments, right? I first had to put in my mind the belief to create a new narrative that give me then enough support to keep me going on my progression, on my path to being able to run 10K. So I decided to believe that, based on the proof that I accumulated, that I can run 6K, right? From I cannot run. So let's write it here. So let's imagine that I want to run 10K. This is my goal, right? Initially, I said I cannot run 10K. And truth be told, I had all good reasons to believe this is the case. Even if I was able to run 5K, I didn't feel convinced that I would be able to run 10 all of a sudden, right? So how did I enable this kind of loop to work for me and not against me? Well, I said that instead of I cannot run 10K, I said I can run 6K, right? So I removed the knot, right? As stupid as this sounds, I removed the knot. I said then I can run 6K. Why? Because I knew I can run 5, and I knew what would it mean to run just one more, right? And then what did I do? I started to build thoughts which were rather empowering, saying to me, yeah, you most probably can actually run. I felt good about this new goal of running 6K. Then I took action. I just went and ran 6K. And then I actually saw that I was able to run 6K. And I did it enough times that now this belief actually was true, right? I didn't have to fool myself, right? That I cannot run 6K because I was able to run 6K. What did I do next? Well, as you can imagine, I said I will be able to run 7K, right? And I did it enough times to not be able to not believe ultimately that I cannot run 7K. I did it enough times that was obvious that I can do it, right? And then I ran up 8K, and then I ran 9K, and then 10K. And guess what? At some point, I was able to run a semi-marathon, right? 21K. And not only that, but now it's part of my routine that I run 4 times a year, 21K. Do I think that I cannot do it? No, because I know I already did it enough times that I don't even spend energy in thinking, will I be able to run a semi-marathon next month, for example, in my case in February? Will I be able to run it? I don't know. I don't think so. No, that's something that I already have as proof in my mind that I don't have to convince myself. And that kind of energy, which is not anymore lost on worrying or negotiating with myself or thinking if I actually can do it or not. That's something that I can reuse for doing some more productive things in my life, right? So this simple loop, because I can use this exercise to increment on towards the thing that will be inevitably leading me to the goal that I want to achieve, it's something that you can reproduce for everything in your life, right? And with enough incrementation, at some point, you end up, because of so much proof, that this identity is not a sad identity anymore, right? It's a happy identity. You feel confident. You feel confident not only in the fact that you can achieve goals, but in the fact that you can trust your own word. And knowing that whatever you say will be done, it's an incredible important safety mechanisms and security, like psychological safety thing that you can do for yourself. Because then you know that no matter the circumstance, no matter what kind of problems you are being faced with in life, no matter the obstacles and the difficulty, you know that you can trust yourself to go through it because you have enough evidence that confirms the fact that you can do hard things and you can trust yourself. And if running is something that you don't care about, of course, don't start running. But if you deeply care about something, if you care about improving your health, if you care, let's say, about just losing weight, think, why do you want to lose weight? Do you want to lose weight so you can look good next summer? Or do you want to lose weight because you know that having a healthy weight is more conducive to living a good life and being able to enjoy more of your everyday living? What's the purpose behind it, right? If you don't have a strong desire to achieve a goal, typically your mind will sabotage all your efforts at some point. Again, you can fool yourself, you can bullshit yourself, but you cannot lie to yourself. You have to be able at some point to have an honest and open dialogue with yourself. I was lucky because I was forced to do it. I know now that even if it was incredibly painful sometimes, the kind of peace of mind that I now have is directly resulting from my capability to look in the mirror at myself, externally and internally, and reflect at my inadequacies and look at what I was hiding from myself all along, right? And it's incredible that we can even do this. It's incredible that we would default into believing all sorts of crazy stuff and compensating externally with all sorts of strange behavior just to avoid looking inside and building and nurturing this relationship that we get to have with ourselves. It's as if we are really not aware and convinced that this is ultimately the most important relationship. And no matter how much support you have from the external world, from your friends, from your family, no one is with you 24 hours a day in your head, but you. And I heard this quote from one of my mentors online, that the only thing that matters really in life is how you feel about yourself when you are by yourself. And I think this is so true. No matter the happy face that you are able to wear from time to time when you are in society, or enjoying the presence of your friends and your family, if you rely on that context to bring you happiness and to give you some sort of well-being, persistent well-being, you are in a very dangerous place, because everything external, you cannot take it for granted. What you can take for granted is your own mind, because that's always on and always with you. And then you start to make friends with it. And then you start that, as much as it can punish you and convince you that you cannot do stuff, at some point, with enough proof, it will not only tolerate your ambition, but it will be actually your best friend. It will support you. Because guess what? When you want now to run a marathon, you most probably will be in the situation, if that running a marathon is important for you, you will be in a situation where you will say, when you will struggle, right? When you will say, you ran 21, you ran 30, you can do it, right? Don't worry, we will do it. So this kind of thoughts that for most people are very abusing, right? And consuming most of their day and the energy throughout the day with thinking and worrying about all sorts of crazy stuff, all this energy, you can claim it back by just doing some very simple things. First, just believe that you can do whatever you say you do, right? Because if you don't believe in yourself, nothing can compensate that. Just believe you can do it. I believed I can overcome my own challenges. I believed that I can actually run even if I thought I cannot do it, right? And two, do what you say you do. If you believe in yourself and then you do what you say you do, then you will accumulate proof which will give you this kind of fuel and ammunition to use whenever you feel like you are struggling. Because if you are not testing yourself in hardship and you are not proving to yourself that you can overcome challenges, how can you expect to be able to confront life and be the pillar of stability for the people who need you most in those difficult moments, right? We can all be happy and enjoy life when it's comfortable and easy, but what do you make of it when it's testing you? I was lucky and unlucky at the same time that until the age of 30, I was not really tested at all by life. And I took so many things for granted. And the comfort that I lived in felt ultimately proved to be so fragile that in the end, I realized that comfort is not something that serves us. I'm not telling now to do crazy stuff to put yourself in danger. But unfortunately, these days, because we have so much comfort, we have to introduce artificial discomfort in our lives. Like wake up early in the morning, 5:30, do some exercise, take a cold shower, right? Even in the winter. Not because people are saying that cold showers improve your health or whatever, but just to do something difficult every single day, to prove that you can do it. And also to be able to regulate your own stress and emotions much better, thanks to the fact that you are able to push yourself through hardship and confront difficult things without being forced to exit immediately. This kind of self-confidence is what gives you the peace of mind on a day-to-day basis. And there is no shortcut for it. There is no supplement or optimization that you can do to you know to replace the need of having to confront yourself in the mirror. So this being said, I am very passionate about this topic. I try to document things that worked for me in my life and I adhere by these days, and how I see life and how I do life today, because I feel that even if there is so many more things to improve and the improvement process never ends, I learned so many good things about the human nature ultimately by learning about myself and how the human mind operates, that I feel this kind of urge to share it with others, right? And it's a very nice thing to experience. So I hope this helps. If you need any kind of support with any kind of challenges that you might face in your life, you can go and check the link in the description, and you can just book a free coaching session where we can look at your situation and I can give you the best advice I can give, right, and I'm capable of. So I hope it was enjoyable. Drop me a comment if this is something that is interesting for you as a topic, and you would like to learn more about a very a specific topic in the next videos. And yeah, I'll be seeing you next time. Thanks for watching.